Chapter 682 Royal Family 1. Several minutes passed like that. Then, without warning, the music stopped. Every instrument fell quiet at once. A heartbeat of stillness swept across the banquet hall. A loud, clear voice echoed through the space. The royal family is here. All heads turned toward the grand entrance. The towering doors opened slowly, and a procession stepped inside. Guards in armor walked first. Then 3 figures entered the hall with calm, dignified steps. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nobles straightened their backs. Others lowered their heads respectfully. Michael's eyes shifted toward the trio. A middle-aged man in heavy, ornate robes walked at the front. His expression was calm. Behind him were 2 younger men, both dressed in refined attire. To Michael's faint surprise, he recognized 2 of them instantly. The middle-aged man was the second prince of the kingdom, whom he had once been trapped with in an illusion before Michael helped stabilize the situation. The younger one on the right was the 7th prince. The same prince who had been in Mage Lien's office during Michael's early days in the capital and had a particularly rude personal guard. As for the 3rd person, Michael studied him, a young man who carried himself with confidence and quiet sharpness. He walked beside the other 2 princes as if he belonged among them completely. Michael did not know him, but given his position at their side, his status must have been similar. Ariane's fingers paused slightly on her glass. Syria straightened in subconscious respect. Whispers spread across the room like ripples through a pond. Michael simply watched calmly. Royalty entering a hall like this changed everything. For Michael, however, it only meant the banquet would become louder again, which meant the peaceful silence he had been enjoying beside the 2 nervous girls was about to end. Pity. Michael took another sip of wine. As he lowered the glass, he felt a small shift beside him. Ariane had gone very still, not in the respectful way everyone else had. Her fingers, which had been resting lightly on the stem of her glass, were now holding it just a bit too firmly. Her eyes were on the entrance like everyone else's, but unlike everyone else, she was not looking at the 2nd prince, nor at the 7th. Her focus was locked on the 3rd man, the unfamiliar one. Michael's gaze followed the line of her sight. The young man walked beside the other princes, calm and composed. He did not smile much, but there was a certain quiet confidence. Around him, Ariane's expression did not change much on the surface. Yet the faint ease she usually showed around Michael had vanished, replaced by something more guarded. Michael narrowed his eyes slightly. This was not just because the royal family had appeared. Ariane had grown up in this environment. Seeing princes and nobles was not new to her. She would not tense up over simple ceremony, which meant the problem was not the entire group. It was that man in particular. Michael watched her for a moment longer, then moved his gaze back to the trio. So it is like that. He did not know what that was yet, but he knew enough to recognize that Ariane's mood had been stable until the moment that man walked in. He considered asking her. It would be simple enough. Ariane, who is he? But if it was a sensitive matter, Ariane would not be able to answer freely. So instead, Michael turned slightly to his other side. Lady Syria, he said casually, his voice relaxed. The one beside the 7th prince. Do you know who he is? Syria, who had been doing her absolute best to blend into the nearest wall, blinked. She followed his gaze toward the entrance. Then her eyes widened a little. You do not know him, Sir Mike? She asked in a low voice as if the very idea was surprising. Michael gave a small shake of his head. Syria hesitated for a heartbeat, then leaned in just enough that her words would not carry far. That is His Highness the 9th Prince, she murmured. Prince Raylion Lionheart. She paused, then added in a soft tone filled with the weight of gossip and quiet admiration. He is often called the Spear of the North. Many consider him one of the strongest contenders for the throne. Michael's eyes lingered on the prince for a moment. 9th Prince, contender for the throne. He glanced sideways at Ariane again. Her gaze was still on Raylion. Syria's voice lowered even more, curiosity slipping into it despite herself. He also has a rather close political relationship with the Evermoon Duchy, she said. There were even rumors in the past that he might become connected to them through marriage. Michael's fingers tapped his glass once. I see, he said quietly. Inwardly, a thought formed. So that is why your mood changed, Arian. Michael let his gaze rest on Prince Raylion for a few more seconds. A person with political ties to the Evermoon Duchy, and old rumors of marrying. Slowly, Michael lowered his glass. Arian's posture was still composed, but that subtle tension never left her shoulders. Her eyes had drifted away from the prince the moment she felt Michael stare on her, yet the faint stiffness around her expression remained. Michael turned his gaze forward again, thoughts quietly weaving together. He remembered the Duke's tournament, a contest for elite talents, a grand event watched by half the kingdom, and the final prize the hand of the Duke's daughter. Even back then, Michael had found it strange. He knew it was a scheme. Why would a Duke place something so important on open display? Now, as he watched Arian's reaction to Prince Raylion, something clicked. Of course, it wasn't random. The Duke's competition was not simply to reward a strong youth. It was a move. By declaring the prize publicly and tying it to a contest, the Duke locked the matter into a promise of honor. Chapter 683 Royal Family 2. By declaring the prize publicly and tying it to a contest, the Duke locked the matter into a promise of honor. If someone won, they would have the right. If someone did not, no noble or prince could complain. It would block the political pressure without offending the royal family too directly. Michael exhaled silently. Looking at Raylion now, it all made sense. If I didn't exist, if that tournament had gone another way, she would have been married by now. A ripple of something he did not immediately recognize passed through him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. But it wasn't pleasant either. A mild discomfort sat at the back of his throat, subtle yet persistent. For a moment, he wondered if it was because Arian was young and still had much of her life ahead of her. Perhaps I simply disliked the idea of someone being forced into marriage too early, he reasoned. But a small part of him quietly disagreed. He pushed that thought aside. Sir Mike. Arian's voice came softly beside him. Michael blinked and turned his head slightly. She looked more composed now, though her eyes still held a touch of something unreadable. Is something wrong? She asked. Michael shook his head. No, just thinking. Syria watched both of them from the corner of her eye, clearly dying to know what had just passed between them but far too polite to ask. Michael returned his attention to the hall. Prince Raylion was greeting nobles now. But Arian was not looking at him anymore. She was looking at Michael. Sir Mike? She said quietly, her tone more controlled than before. Would you accompany me after this? Michael nodded. Of course. Arian's fingers relaxed around her glass, the tension finally fading. Syria looked between them and felt another invisible dagger slip into her chest. Michael, meanwhile, took another sip of wine. He did not understand why that strange discomfort still lingered in his chest. But he did understand one thing clearly. If the Duke held another competition right now, he wasn't sure he would be comfortable with the prize being the same. He wasn't sure why. But he wasn't. Arian took a breath, as if steadying herself, then lifted her gaze toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall. It seems His Highness the Second Prince will be the one taking control over the banquet tonight, she said softly. Michael followed her line of sight. The three princes were already making their way toward the front. Servants and officials adjusted positions smoothly, as if everything had been rehearsed in advance. The musicians began to ready themselves again, waiting for a signal. Michael tilted his head slightly. Why the second prince? He asked. If they are all contenders for the throne, would they not share the role equally? Arian gave a small, almost wry smile. That would be ideal in theory, she replied. But this is the royal family. Superiority is still something that must be respected. Rank and seniority exist for a reason. She lifted her glass and took a light sip before continuing. Even among contenders for the throne, there are differences. Birth order, achievements, military support, political backing. The second prince is older than the seventh and the ninth, more experienced in open court. He also happens to be the second person with the highest possibility of gaining the throne. Michael raised an eyebrow. Second. Ariane nodded slightly. His Highness the Crown Prince is still the one most likely to ascend, she said. In terms of open acknowledgement, at least, the second prince stands directly after him. His faction is very stable. The nobles trust his temperament. Many military officers respect his record. It is natural that he is the one to oversee formal occasions like this when the Crown Prince is not present. Michael looked at the man again. It also serves another purpose, Ariane added quietly. By allowing him to stand at the front tonight, the royal family reminds everyone that he is still an important pillar. Even with other princes rising, the old order has not yet crumbled. There was no obvious criticism in her voice, only a clear understanding of how things worked. Syria listened in silence. To her, this was familiar ground. Court talk, power analysis. Yet, hearing Ariane explain it so simply, with Michael standing beside her, made everything feel strangely more vivid, as if the three of them were standing near the heart of the kingdom rather than at the edge of the hall. Michael thought for a moment. Then what of the ninth prince? He asked. If the second prince is second in line by possibility, where does Prince Raylion stand? Ariane hesitated, then answered. In terms of official acknowledgement, he is lower. In terms of potential dangers to the throne, he is much higher than his rank suggests. Her lips curved just a little, but her eyes were serious. Some people like to call him a dark horse. I think he is simply someone who refuses to stay where other people place him. Michael absorbed that quietly. Second prince, a stable candidate. Ninth prince, a dangerous contender with unexpected reach. Seventh prince, a younger player with room to grow. The pieces of the royal family, arranged neatly before the eyes of the entire kingdom. The music shifted, rising in a newer, more formal melody as the second prince stepped forward to address the hall. Ariane lowered her voice to a whisper only Michael could hear. Tonight will mostly be greetings, introductions, and veiled negotiations. It is nothing unusual. Michael glanced at her profile. Yet you seem uneasy, he said calmly. Ariane paused for half a heartbeat, then forced a light smile. It is only because too many eyes are here tonight, she replied. Nothing more. Michael did not call her out on it. He simply nodded once. I see. Syria watched them both silently. The second prince stepped fully onto the platform. The hall fell into respectful silence. The banquet had truly begun. Chapter 684 Boasting. The second prince's presence was not overwhelming like a warrior's aura or a mage's pressure. It was refined, the natural authority of someone accustomed to standing above others. Esteemed guests, he began, voice steady and warm, carrying effortlessly across the grand hall. We thank you all for attending tonight's banquet. A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. The prince nodded lightly, allowing it to fade before continuing. Tonight is not just a celebration, he said. It is a reminder of our unity, our strength, and our shared future. Michael blinked. Syria straightened subtly, as if expecting this part. The prince continued with smooth confidence. Our Lionheart kingdom, though younger than some surrounding us, has carved its name into history with unwavering resolve. Our warriors stand unmatched. Our scholars are sought after by courts across the lands. More nobles murmured approvingly. Michael listened politely. Then the prince raised his chin with quiet pride. Under the Black Serpent Empire, our kingdom is counted among the 3 strongest vassal kingdoms. Our voice carries weight even within the imperial court. A few people even clapped boldly at that. Michael stared. What is the purpose of all these flowery words? He sipped his wine. The speech sounded nice, but he could not see what any of this had to do with a banquet. Beside him, Arian listened with a calm, perfectly neutral expression. Syria looked mildly impressed. Michael squinted at the stage, then leaned down slightly. "Lady Syria," he asked quietly, "what exactly is the point of all this?" Syria blinked, as if snapped out of her admiration. "Point?" she whispered back. "Of the speech." "Yes." She coughed lightly into her glass to hide her reaction. Ariane's ear twitched in amusement. Syria leaned a little closer. Her voice kept low. "This is simply how royal banquets work, Sir Mike. The prince must reaffirm the kingdom's strength and unity. It reassures the nobles. It reinforces the image of stability, that we stand strong." Michael stared at her blankly. "So this is political boasting?" "That is a blunt way to say it," Syria admitted. "But essentially, yes." Michael nodded slowly. "I see." Inside, he did not see at all. If the kingdom is strong, it is strong. If it is weak, it is weak. How does saying nice words make anything stronger? He took another sip of wine, allowing Syria's explanation to settle. On the platform, the second prince continued his speech, now praising the contributions of the nobles, the courage of the young generation, the prosperity of the duchies, and the loyalty of the kingdom's subjects. Michael eyed Ariane. She met his gaze, lips curving just slightly, as if she understood exactly what he was thinking. Michael raised one brow. She looked away with a tiny cough. Syria, meanwhile, nodded at each grand statement from the stage with a soft, respectful expression, until she caught Michael glancing her way. She froze mid-nod and quickly pretended to sip her wine instead. Michael looked once more toward Syria. "So the kingdom's strength is improved by speeches?" Syria choked a little on her drink. Ariane covered her mouth with her hand, eyes widening in suppressed laughter. Syria managed a dignified inhale and whispered, "Sir Mike, please do not say such things out loud." Michael nodded calmly. "I will not." Syria placed a hand over her forehead. Ariane exhaled softly, smiling now, her earlier tension fading, even if only a little, and the banquet truly began to move forward. The applause died down again as the second prince lifted his hand. Once more, his expression shifted slightly, the easy confidence softening into something more solemn. "Of course," he said. "Tonight is not only for reunion and relaxation." The hall quieted further. "There is also an important matter to address, one that I believe many of you are already aware of." A faint hum of anticipation moved through the crowd. Michael's eyes narrowed a fraction. The prince paused just long enough to let the tension build. Then continued. "I speak," he said, "of the ancient ruin discovered by the old king, my royal father, during his journeys across our lands." The atmosphere changed immediately. Whispers stirred. Even the nobles who had been pretending indifference moments ago now looked fully attentive. The second prince let the murmur swell, then raised his voice again. "It is said to belong to a legendary figure," he went on. "One whose name exists only in fragments, yet whose strength, even by imperial standards, was extraordinary." He smiled faintly. "In the entire Black Serpent Empire, individuals of such level could be counted on one hand." A quiet weight settled over the hall. Even those who had not taken the rumors seriously before now listened without blinking. "The discovery of this ruin," the second prince said, "was a great fortune for our Lionheart kingdom." He let the words hang there, his tone neither boastful nor humble, simply stating it as fact. "However," he continued, "due to certain circumstances we were unable to secure it exclusively for ourselves." Everyone's thoughts moved quickly. Naturally, something that belonged to an empire-level figure would not be quietly left to a single mid-tier kingdom. "Even so," the prince said, his voice firming, "through the royal family's efforts, negotiations, and concessions, we have secured the right to send some of our kingdom's brightest youths into the ruin." Murmurs rose again. Michael heard a few phrases float around him. He ignored them. The second prince raised a hand again, and the whispers settled. Those arrangements, I believe, most of you already know. The academies have selected their representatives. Certain duchies and pillars of the kingdom have already confirmed their candidates. A few nobles smiled with restrained pride. Others hid their frustration well. Michael remained expressionless. However, the prince said, his lips curving faintly, we are all aware that the Lionheart Kingdom is not made up only of academy elites and direct heirs. His gaze swept the hall. There are many outstanding talents who stand outside those convenient categories. The mood shifted again. More people straightened unconsciously. Chapter 685, Ninth Prince. Refresh chapter to clear error. Some of you are here tonight, the prince went on. That is why, the prince said, his tone carrying a hint of pride. The royal family continued its discussions with the imperial envoys and other involved forces. He paused, then allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. And through our efforts, we have acquired 10 additional slots into the ruin. This time, the reaction was immediate and uncontrolled. The hall rippled with noise. 10. Even Michael lifted his brows slightly. That number was not small. At this level, each slot was as valuable as a mid-tier territory. Beside him, Syria inhaled softly. The second prince let the stir continue for a moment before raising his hand. These 10 new positions, he said clearly, will not be restricted solely to the academies, nor will they be distributed purely by birth status. The noise grew louder. On stage, the second prince's smile deepened slightly. I understand, he said, that many among you desire the chance to enter that place, to test your fate, to seek opportunities that may not appear again in this lifetime. That silenced some of the murmurs. Desire and anxiety mixed in the air. Michael twirled his glass lightly, watching the liquid catch the light. The prince's next words fell slowly, deliberately. Which is why, he said, in order to distribute these 10 new positions fairly, and to give true talents a chance to step forward, we have decided on a particular method. It was then Michael realized something. This did not line up with what he had been told. A week ago, Arian had mentioned that the participants were already decided. So why is this suddenly becoming a spectacle? His brows lowered slightly. Beside him, Arian still watched the stage, her expression calm. Michael shifted his gaze to her. She felt it and glanced his way. For a brief heartbeat, their eyes met. Arian gave a tiny shrug, so small that anyone who did not know her would have missed it completely, then looked forward again as if nothing had happened. So even you did not expect this. He was starting to think maybe it was just him who was just becoming aware of the new information after all this while. Michael turned his attention back to the second prince, waiting for him to explain what particular method he had prepared. The prince drew breath, ready to speak. Your Highness. The clear voice rose from within the crowd. It was not shouted, yet it carried cleanly through the hall. Conversation cut off like a thread being sliced. Heads turned in the direction of the sound. The interruption alone was enough to draw shocked looks. At a moment like this, when the prince was about to announce something important, who would dare? Michael's eyes followed the shifting gazes until they settled on the one who had spoken. A young man stepped forward from a cluster of nobles near the front. Murmurs broke out at once. Leonard. Lord Leonard is here? The Queen's nephew. Recognition rippled through the hall, turning annoyance and shock into wary attention. Michael's eyes narrowed. Leonard Vale. He remembered him clearly. After all, his encounter with him was the first time he fought someone whose power came directly from their bloodline. The memory flickered through his mind. The second prince's expression did not change much, but the faint tightening at the corners of his eyes betrayed a hint of displeasure at being interrupted. Lord Leonard, he said, his tone still smooth. You wish to speak? Leonard smiled politely and bowed just enough to be considered respectful without looking even a fraction submissive. If it pleases your highness, Leonard said, this humble one only has a small request, or perhaps a clarification. The hall quieted again. Leonard straightened, his gaze steady on the platform. Before you reveal this particular method, he said, voice clear but not loud. Could your highness first tell us who the originally selected candidates were? The ones chosen before these 10 additional slots appeared. A hushed shock ran through the crowd. He actually said it. Some nobles paled, glancing quickly toward the royal family, as if expecting a thunderbolt to fall for the offense of questioning the flow. Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. You are doing this here? He studied Leonard Vale more closely. The polite smile, the relaxed shoulders, the complete lack of fear in his eyes even while addressing a prince. In front of the kingdom's elite. What are you planning? The hall held its breath. The second prince opened his mouth to respond. But another voice cut in. Interesting question. I am sure everyone here also wishes to know that. Every head snapped toward the new speaker, and shock rippled through the room like a struck bell. Prince Raylion, the 9th prince himself, had interrupted. Many nobles nearly lost their composure. Some forgot how to breathe. Interrupting a prince was already unthinkable. But for one prince to interrupt another during an official announcement, that was different entirely. The second prince's fingers paused in the air. A tiny shift in his expression, a hardly noticeable tightening of his jaw, revealed the smallest crack in his calm. The second prince prepared to answer again. But before a single word could leave his lips, a third voice entered the fray. I agree, the 7th prince said lightly. Dead silence. Unmoving silence. Even the musicians froze, hands hovering over strings and keys, too, afraid to breathe wrongly. 3 royal voices had spoken against the flow, all aimed at the second prince's announcement. Michael slowly placed his wine glass down. This is getting political. The second prince lowered his raised hand. The gesture was small, but his aura seemed to thicken slightly, the refined calm of a veteran. Court figure slipping back into place to cover whatever tension simmered beneath. His gaze moved first to the 7th prince, then to the 9th, then finally to Leonard Vale. Ariane inhaled lightly. Michael heard it even over the silence. Syria's eyes were wide, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. Michael watched everything with growing interest. For some reason, he felt like being a bystander at chaos was quite interesting. Chapter 686 Allocation Method. Michael might not have been politically smart or able to read every subtle shift in the atmosphere, but when the signs were so obvious that even a common man would notice, the situation became as clear to him as to anyone. He had a basic grasp of what was happening in the banquet hall right now. The second prince stood on the platform, hand lowered, expression calm on the surface. In front of him was Leonard Vale, the queen's nephew. To his sides were the 9th prince and the 7th prince, who had just finished publicly agreeing with Leonard. 3 voices on one side, 1 voice on the other. Even without understanding the deeper currents, Michael could tell something very simple. He did not know much about court politics, but he did know one thing very well. People did not interrupt princes lightly, and princes probably did not interrupt other princes without reason. Ariane, Michael said quietly. She tilted her head a fraction, not taking her eyes off the platform. Is this normal? He asked. Her lips twitched. For princes to speak with each other during public events? She replied softly. Yes, for 2 of them to step on the same line and press another in front of the entire noble circle. Her voice lowered even further. No, not normal. Michael nodded slightly, so he was not imagining things. On stage, the second prince finally spoke. 7th brother, 9th brother. His voice was mild, his tone still courteous. And Lord Leonard, it seems tonight's interest in this matter is quite high. There was no overt displeasure in his words, but those who were familiar with phrasing heard the edge beneath. Raylion smiled faintly. It is only natural, the 9th prince said. The ruin concerns the future of the kingdom. If the original candidates are already decided, then I see no harm in sharing their names before announcing any new methods. It would only reassure everyone that the process up to this point has been clean. The words were light. The implication was not. The 7th prince nodded with an almost innocent expression. Yes, our royal family has nothing to hide, he said. If the original list is impeccable, then saying it out loud will only strengthen trust. Leonard Vale did not add anything else. He just stood patiently, as if he had simply asked a curious question and then stepped back to let the princes speak. The second prince let a heartbeat of silence pass. Then another. Michael could practically feel the nobles choking on the tension. Some of them looked like they desperately wanted to leave the hall but were nailed to the floor by etiquette. Syria leaned closer to Michael, her voice barely audible. "This is bad," she whispered. "This is very bad." "How so?" Michael asked. Syria inhaled slowly, her gaze still fixed on the platform. "The selection process," she murmured. "Up until now it has been handled quietly. The academies, the duchies, the royal household. Everyone negotiated, made compromises, balanced favors." She wet her lips. "If His Highness reveals the names now on this stage, and any of the choices look biased or too political or too heavily tilted toward certain factions, it will become a public weapon." Michael's eyes went back to Leonard. "So they want to force him to show his hand," he said. Ariane's lashes lowered for a moment. "Yes," she answered quietly. Michael absorbed that. He was no noble strategist, but even he could follow this level of scheming. If the second prince refused to reveal the names, it would look like he had something to hide. If he revealed them, whatever biases were hidden inside would be dragged into the open. Michael thought briefly of the people he knew who were already chosen. He could already imagine the possible complaints. Once exposed, it would be judged by everyone's private interests. "Is there no rule against this kind of questioning?" Michael asked. "There are rules," Ariane said softly. "There is also power." Her gaze moved briefly to Raylion. "Tonight, the ones asking are not minor nobles. They are the Queen's nephew and two princes who stand high in the struggle for succession. If His Highness the second prince refuses too strongly, it will look like he fears them." Michael considered that. So in simple terms, he cannot ignore them, but he also cannot give them too much space. On the platform, the second prince finally allowed himself a small laugh. "You wound me, ninth brother," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Do you truly think I am so foolish as to present a method without being prepared for such questions?" His voice was smooth again, carrying neatly through the hall. "I have no objection to sharing the original names," he went on. "In fact, I had already planned to introduce them during the course of this banquet." A few nobles visibly relaxed. The prince's attempt to corner him had been met, at least on the surface. The second prince raised his hand in a graceful gesture. A royal attendant stepped forward immediately, holding a small scroll. "Before that, however," the second prince said, "I would like to remind everyone of something simple." His gaze swept over the hall. "The ruin is not a family courtyard. It is not a training ground. It is a place marked by the shadow of an individual who stood near the peak of the empire. The quotas we hold were not gained easily." His tone cooled just a touch. "The original list was formed not to please every faction, but to ensure the highest chance of survival and success. This includes academy elites, pillars of the kingdom, and those whose contributions have already been recognized by the crown." Michael felt a few gazes subtly shift in his direction after that sentence. He ignored them. The second prince nodded to the attendant. "Now, since there is such interest, let us satisfy it," he said calmly. "We will announce the original candidates first. After that, we will speak of the 10 new slots and the method to allocate them." Chapter 687 Troublesome Nobles 1. The attendant unrolled the scroll. The hall leaned forward. Michael, however, stayed relaxed, feeling the stem of the glass between his fingers. He already had a rough idea of what would happen. Some names would be called. Some people would be pleased. Others would be offended. And somewhere in that list was his own name. He was starting to wonder what the reaction would be. The second prince lifted his chin slightly, signaling for silence. "We will begin with the royal family," he said. Perfectly normal starting point. Expected, even. The hall's reaction reflected that. It was the royal family. Of course they would have a slot. Michael nodded to himself. Reasonable enough. The second prince continued. The first name on the original list is His Highness the 10th Prince. A small stir rolled through the hall, though much quieter than before. Michael blinked. 10th? He could not stop his immediate thought. Just how many children did the old king give birth to? He mentally counted the princes he had met or heard about. 2nd prince. 7th prince. 9th prince. Now 10th prince. And there were still more he had not seen. Arian had once mentioned that the old king was vigorous. Michael now suspected vigorous was the polite version. But something else pulled his attention. The hall did not react. At all. Many nobles simply nodded, as if they had been expecting it. Some even looked bored. Michael turned his head toward Syria. Before he could speak, Arian tapped his shoulder. Her voice cut him off softly, without looking at him. "Sir Mike," she murmured. "Am I the only one here who is quietly praying you do not ask something obvious?" Michael blinked. Syria choked. He stared between the two. "Of course the 10th prince would be selected," she sighed. "He is the only direct royal heir among the younger generation whose talent is comparable to Princess Priscilla." Comparable to Princess Priscilla. Arian had mentioned something that caught his attention. Michael's eyes narrowed a little. Of course he knew of Princess Priscilla. She was not only the first rank 3 human he had met in the land of origin, she was also the only person who had come close to discovering his identity as someone not native to this world. More importantly, he understood her strength. It was said she reached that level before the age of 70. Michael knew what that meant. He knew because he was stuck at that threshold himself. Reaching rank 3 was not something one accomplished easily. The law comprehension required for that step was a blockade that turned countless prodigies into lifelong second-raters. If he had not been stubborn about finding the perfect law to fit him, if he had just taken an easier, more generic law like others, he would have already stepped into rank 3 by now. It was not as simple as that, of course, but it was not far from the truth either. Michael refused to weaken himself just to rise quickly. He could accept speed. He could accept struggle. But the law he anchored himself to would shape the rest of his path. That was why others spent decades searching for the law that resonated with them. There were certainly those talented enough to break through early with a lesser law, but they still chose the harder road to avoid crippling their futures. Princess Priscilla's accomplishment proved her monstrous talent. To reach rank 3 early meant something whether she took an easy path or not. For a prince to have a talent described as comparable to hers, that is remarkable, he muttered under his breath. Yes, Arian said softly. The 10th prince is considered the shining star of our generation among the royal family. The second prince waited for the whispers to settle. He looked composed again. Let us proceed, he said. The hall quieted once more. Michael shifted his grip on the wineglass. The next names would be from the academies. From the academies, 3 prodigies were named in succession. 1 from the Royal Academy, 1 from the Mage Academy, 1 from the Warrior Academy. Each name carried weight. Their reputations were solid enough that the hall stirred with noise, but it never turned into chaos. With the 10th prince included earlier, that made 4 names. Announced. 6 remained. And now it was time for the major families. 3 names were mentioned, but perhaps due to their status, no one spoke. However, when Arian's name was mentioned, Michael noticed a lot of people with disagreement on their faces, but none dared to speak. In the end, there was 1 duke, 1 marquis, and 1 count. From the setup and everything he had been hearing, Michael could tell that the kingdom truly chose the first 10 slots with clear intention. Either they were the most talented in the kingdom or they had some connection to beast taming. The kingdom was not taking chances. They wanted to gain the maximum benefit from the legendary ruin. At this point, there had been no real conflict. Michael wondered briefly if that would remain true when the final 3 names were announced, because he already knew which names were next. The second prince did not pause or adjust. He simply continued, voice smooth and steady as ever. The next name, he said, is Ren Noah. A ripple of confusion swept through the hall. Ren Noah? Who? Only a handful of nobles even recognized the surname, and most of them wore blank expressions. The second prince, expecting confusion, immediately followed with clarification. Ren Noah, son of Baron Noah. The stir intensified. A baron's son? Among the original 10? A place meant for the strongest youths of the kingdom? The hall did not erupt, but it was close. People exchanged looks, eyes sharp with suspicion and disbelief. Then the second prince spoke again, and the atmosphere snapped. Still, he is also the first and currently the sole disciple of Grand Knight Varen. Silence. Complete, crushing silence. Chapter 688 Troublesome Nobles 2. Grand Knight Varen. Michael did not need Syria to explain that name. Even he, who ignored most politics, knew it. This was someone at the very peak of the kingdom's strength. Ren did not even need to be a noble. With that title behind him, even a commoner would have been treated as high nobility. The fact that he was already a baron's son only made the matter easier to accept, which was why no one spoke. Mouths that had been half open to object closed without a sound. Eyes that had been filled with disdain cooled into calculation. Grand Knight Varen had always kept himself far from court games. He answered directly to the crown. He did not attach himself to factions, did not attend banquets like this, and rarely took personal disciples. And now his first and only disciple was standing among the 10. Of course he would. Here and there, a few nobles finally connected the name to a recent memory. The Duke's competition. The youth with a wooden sword. The Baron's son who had stood on even ground with an Empire prince and struck him down in front of the capital. Ren Noah. Michael watched the shifting expressions around the hall. For a moment he could almost see the image again. A worn wooden blade. A youth standing straight despite exhaustion. An unconcealed, stubborn will. He felt his lips pull slightly. If someone like that did not qualify for a place in the ruin, then the word talent had no meaning at all. From the moment Grand Knight Varen's name was spoken, the earlier tension shifted. Doubt turned into grudging acceptance. For now, there was no room to argue. That was when Michael felt it. Two gazes. He did not need to look to know who they belonged to, but he looked anyway. On the high platform, the seventh prince's eyes slid briefly across the hall, passing over nobles and guests before pausing on him for a heartbeat that lasted just a little too long. Not far from him, the ninth prince, Ray Lion, did the same. Their attention moved on as if nothing had happened. Michael's fingers tapped once against the stem of his glass. So that is how it is. From the first name to now, everything had been too clean. The 10th prince. The 3 academy prodigies. The noble heirs. Ren Noah with Grand Knight Varen behind him. Every choice had been firm, sharp and hard to attack. Justifiable on paper. Defensible in public. Yet the 9th and 7th princes had still forced this entire list into the open. Michael had wondered what they wanted to achieve. The closer they came to the end, the clearer it became. They were not doing this out of idle curiosity. Only a fool would pick a fight with the second prince in front of the entire noble circle for no reason. Michael let his gaze drift back to the scroll in the attendant's hands. 2 names remained. One of them was his. He exhaled slowly, feeling his thoughts settle. So that is where the conflict will start. And as expected, the 2 princes finally acted. The 9th prince spoke first. It seems clear to everyone, he said, that the royal family chose well. Every candidate announced so far is truly one of the brightest in the kingdom under the age allowed by the ruin. A wave of nods moved through the nobles. No one objected. How could they? Every single name had come with force, prestige, or achievement. Behind it, the 7th prince followed with an easy laugh. I agree completely. Some nobles allowed themselves a small breath of relief. Some even felt excitement rising in their chests. 10 more slots were opening, and the first 10 were already so far above them that competing with Them had always been unrealistic. But none of those emotions showed on their faces. No one dared look too pleased in front of the second prince, while tension still hung in the air from being interrupted again. The second prince opened his mouth to speak. He never got the chance. The seventh prince raised his hand in a casual gesture. To be honest, he said, I only knew a few of the names on this list before tonight. It is the same for many of us here. The ninth prince nodded, smiling toward the crowd. It cannot be helped. Among all the princes, only second brother was deeply involved, and seeing the results, we can only say he performed admirably. The seventh prince continued without pause. In that case, since the list is almost complete, I believe second brother can reveal the last two names together. I'm sure they will be the same as the rest. The ninth prince added smoothly, and then we may finally move on to the exciting part of the banquet. At this point, even the second prince struggled to keep his composure. A faint pressure rolled out from him. The air in the hall tightened. Some of the weaker nobles stiffened instinctively, spines straightening as if a hand had pressed gently between their shoulders. Then the pressure vanished. The second prince exhaled once, and the invisible weight drew back into him as though it had never appeared. A smooth smile returned to his face. You give me too much credit, seventh brother, ninth brother, he said. After all, he continued, eyes curving faintly, to say that I alone directed the list and discussed with every academy and pillar of the kingdom would be the same as announcing that you have already entrusted me with the reins of the kingdom itself. The hall stilled again. It was a joke. Everyone understood it as a joke. But beneath the humor, there was a quiet statement. If this truly rested on him alone, then the other princes had already admitted his superiority. Several nobles lowered their gazes, hiding the brief light in their eyes. On the high platform, the seventh prince's smile thinned a little. The second prince inclined his head slightly toward them. Fortunately, he went on, still smiling, His Majesty the King, the elders of the Royal Council, the academy heads, and many others were involved. I was only one voice among many. He turned back to the hall. So now, let us finish what we started, was what the second prince said when a loud announcement from the hall and trance echoed. The great Princess Priscilla has arrived. Everyone pay your respects. Chapter 689. You dare to disrespect me? 1. The hall shifted instantly. Every head lowered. Even the most arrogant young heirs dipped into formal bows without hesitation. Expressions changed across the room like a wave. Leonard Vale and the two princes were certainly not in the best of moods. Their reactions were subtle, but they were there. Princess Priscilla was not someone they could ignore. Michael watched the shift with mild curiosity. He did not know the proper depth of royal etiquette, but he simply followed what the crowd did, lowering his head. Yet anyone who glanced his way would have noticed something very simple. His posture was relaxed and casual. At the entrance, the heavy doors opened fully. Soft footsteps echoed into the hall. Princess Priscilla appeared, dressed in a deep blue gown embroidered with faint silver patterns. Her presence alone pressed against the hall with a quiet force. The nobles kept their bows until her voice floated forward. Raise your heads. They obeyed immediately. The princes stepped down from the platform and bowed in greeting as well. Princess Priscilla's gaze swept across the hall once before she stepped forward toward the platform. Michael watched her approach. Her steps were steady, her presence sharp, and there was a faint hint of curiosity in her eyes as she looked across the gathered nobles. For a fleeting moment, her gaze touched him. Then she moved on. The hall remained silent until she reached the front. The second prince gestured politely. Your Highness, your arrival honors this gathering. Priscilla inclined her head in acknowledgement. I heard you had a royal banquet. It would be rude of me not to attend. Let me get you a seat. It's fine. Her tone was calm but carried a natural authority. Michael noticed the seventh and ninth princes exchanging brief looks, their earlier confidence slightly shaken. It was clear they had not anticipated her appearance. The second prince gave them a mild smile. He turned back to the crowd. Now that the great princess has joined us, let us continue. The scroll was lifted again. The second prince glanced briefly at Princess Priscilla, then at the seventh and ninth princes whose polite expressions were now stretched thin. The ninth name on the list is Viscount Mike Nor. The hall reacted in an uneven wave. Not many people knew Michael personally, but not many were unaware of him either. The Duke's tournament, the rapid elevation to Viscount. Some turned their eyes towards him. Michael felt those gazes but did not react. He simply stood with a relaxed posture. He noticed something else. The faces of the seventh prince, the ninth prince, and Leonard Vale were no longer pleasant. Michael understood why. Most likely their intention had been to corner the second prince, publicly, and force a controversy. But with Princess Priscilla suddenly present, the ground beneath them had shifted. With her here, any attempt to stir chaos around the selection list now carried risk. The second prince lifted his hand again. And the final name, he continued, is Yuga. Michael felt an unexpected sense of nostalgia. Yuga. He had not seen the boy since the day they fought. A pure force of nature wrapped in human skin. He wondered briefly why Yuga was not here, and why Ren was not here either. If their names were on the list, then surely they were invited. But neither of them stood anywhere in the hall. He was still thinking about that when a soft voice drifted from the far end of the hall. It was quiet, almost gentle, yet it spread through the entire space as if carried by a breeze. No surname? Is this Yuga perhaps a commoner? What is a commoner name doing here? A hush fell. Faces turned toward the source, though the speaker remained out of easy sight. A moment later, a louder voice boomed from the entrance. His Highness, the 10th Prince, has arrived. Everyone pay your respects. A wave of movement washed through the hall. Dozens of nobles dropped into bows. People lowered their heads in perfect, practiced motion. Except for 5. The 7th Prince. The 9th Prince. Princess Priscilla. The 2nd Prince, who did not bow to a younger sibling. And Michael. He remained standing with a faint frown. A few nobles who noticed him stiffened in alarm. Whispers nearly broke out on the spot. The Viscount did not bow. Was he mad? Did he not know who the 10th Prince was? Ariane reacted first. Her fingers brushed lightly against Michael's sleeve. Her voice barely, more than a breath. Sir Mike, bow your head. Syria leaned in from the other side, her whisper sharp with urgency. As well, Michael did not move. Ariane's breath caught. Syria's eyes widened. It was not defiance they feared, but misunderstanding. Failing to show respect to a prince in front of other royal nobility was not a small flaw in court etiquette. Sir Mike, Ariane hissed under her breath. Please. He behaved as though he heard nothing. Michael's attention remained fixed on the doors with a steady, unreadable expression. Some nobles lifted their eyes slightly and froze when they saw the Viscount still standing straight. Syria's hand trembled as she felt the gazes of the other royalty shift toward their location. Ariane swallowed hard. Sir Mike, please at least lower your gaze, she whispered. Michael did not. His brow remained slightly furrowed, as if something about the approaching presence had caught his interest. The hall doors opened wider. A collective feeling ran through the nobles. He had arrived. The 10th Prince. The heavy doors parted fully. Light spilled into the hall, catching on the figure who stepped through. He looked to be around 20. His hair was a deep gold. Each strand seemed to catch the light in a way that made his presence impossible to ignore. It framed a face that would have been handsome in a gentle way if not for the sharpness of his features. But it was his eyes that drew the most attention to anyone that laid their eyes on him. Chapter 690. You dare to disrespect me? 2. Gold at the center, deep amber near the edges, and a slit-like focus that resembled the gaze of a beast. Michael watched the prince with calm eyes. So this was the one said to rival Princess Priscilla in talent. He did give off a sense of strength. At least he felt stronger than Ren months ago and stronger than the Imperial Prince Ren had cut down. But to Michael this was still too weak. Michael had no issue bowing as he was simply following the crowd. He had followed the crowd without complaint when Princess Priscilla arrived, even without understanding every rule of etiquette. But bowing now, after hearing the 10th prince's voice at the entrance, felt uncomfortable. The first words the prince had spoken upon arrival had brushed against Michael in a way he could not ignore, so he watched instead. After greeting Princess Priscilla, the 10th prince turned slightly. His gaze shifted toward the second prince and he gave a respectful nod. The second prince returned the nod with equal composure. Only after that brief exchange did the 10th prince's eyes move on. He did not look at the 7th prince or the 9th prince. He treated them as though they were air standing at his sides. The 7th and 9th prince's expressions twisted for a moment, but the 10th prince did not seem to care. His attention shifted toward the list on the scroll as if nothing else mattered. Room. Michael watched all of this in silence. So this was the royal family. It was one big messy thing. The 10th prince let his gaze slide over the scroll. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if recalling something. He spoke in a calm voice that carried through the hall. "What was that name I heard earlier?" The room went still again. "Oh, right. That was it." He sounded almost thoughtful. "I arrived with my auntie but did not enter with her. I had a few things to settle before stepping in." His eyes lifted from the scroll and swept the hall. "But even from the entrance, I heard something strange. A name that did not fit." His tone lost all softness. "What was a commoner name doing on the list?" The words struck the hall like cold water. The 10th prince continued without pausing. "No surname, no house, no title, yet placed beside the heirs of noble lines and the best talents of the kingdom." His eyes sharpened. "Does the ruin allow any random name now?" Michael let his eyes drift across the hall. Not everyone agreed with the 10th prince, but most nobles did. He saw it in the small nods. In the way a few shoulders relaxed, as though someone had finally voiced what many wanted to say. Some looked uncomfortable, but agreement was still the dominant color. Michael's gaze shifted toward Leonard. The queen's nephew had gone still, yet his expression had changed more than most. There was a faint brightness in his eyes now. The corners of his mouth had lifted an almost invisible amount. He was pleased. On the platform, the 7th prince's face had lost its strain. His earlier annoyance shifted into quiet satisfaction. The 9th prince, Raylion, did not smile widely, but his eyes carried an entertained light. The 10th prince looked ready to speak again. Before the next word left his lips, another voice cut across the hall. "And what is wrong with a commoner?" Silence fell in a single instant. Heads turned. It was one thing for a prince to interrupt another prince. But for someone else to do it? Madness. Arian felt the blood drain from her face. Siria's fingers closed tightly around the fabric of her dress. The source of the voice stood in plain sight. Michael. On the platform, the 7th prince's eyes froze. The amusement in Raylion's eyes deepened. Leonard Vale turned his head in disbelief before narrowing his gaze. Princess Priscilla's brows lifted a fraction. There was no shock there, only interest. The second prince went still, fingers loosening around the armrest as he resisted the urge to rub his forehead. The 10th prince's gaze swung toward the center of the hall. Those beast-like eyes locked onto Michael again. A faint ripple of pressure washed through the air. It was not enough to break anyone, but enough to make weaker. Nobles draw sharp breaths. Michael's expression did not change. The 10th prince's voice cut through the tension. "Did you say something?" His tone was mild at first, almost casual, but every noble felt the air tighten. Dozens of eyes snapped toward Michael again. Arian's breath stopped. Siria's fingers dug into her dress. Michael met the prince's gaze without hesitation. "I asked what was wrong with a commoner." Then the 10th prince laughed. A wide, bright, openly mocking laugh that bounced off the gilded walls and cut across the nobles like a blade dipped in contempt. He wiped a non-existent tear from the corner of his eye while still chuckling. "A commoner," he said. "A commoner." His smile sharpened. "Do you truly not understand?" Or are you pretending? He took a single step forward. Commoners fetch water. Commoners sweep streets. Commoners hunt rabbits and boars for coin. His eyes narrowed. Commoners do not stand beside heirs of noble blood, and they certainly do not enter ancient ruins meant for the pillars of the kingdom. His gaze swept the hall in a slow, disdainful arc. To compare a commoner to a noble is like comparing mud to marble. A few nobles flinched, not because they disagreed but because of how blunt he was. The 10th prince returned his gaze to Michael. It is the natural order. Commoners serve, nobles lead, and those without a house or history should know their place. His voice dropped, quiet but carrying. Unless you are saying they do not? Unless you are suggesting mud should decorate the palace floors. The hall went silent. Everyone waited. What would the Viscount say? Michael met the prince's eyes and spoke evenly. For someone weaker than a commoner, you do have a lot to say. Chapter 691. Depending on the place a person grew up in, their thoughts and instincts would take shape in a certain way. That was natural. Michael was not someone born in the Lionheart Kingdom. He was not raised in its rigid layers of rank and blood. He came from worlds where, at least on the surface, everyone was equal. On Earth, money and power still created distance, but people walked the same streets and stood in the same lines. In Aurora, strength mattered, but the system did not say a non-supernatural was lesser than a supernatural. Just a few months of playing noble in the land of origin were not enough to rewrite that foundation. Bowing to others was not the problem. He could bow to a king. He could bow to a beggar. He could bow to a child if he felt it was worth it or if he felt like it. What he could not accept was bowing because someone believed other lives were lesser by birth. Fearing to open his mouth because of his background was also not something he accepted. He still had common sense. He could read the room. He knew exactly what could be said and what needed to be left alone. But where most people learn to bend first, Michael did not come from a place that had taught him that habit. In a hall full of nobles trained from birth to follow rank, he was an oddity who did not fit the pattern of the Lionheart Kingdom at all. He understood that much very clearly, and even with every gaze pressing down on him, he did not take the words back. The 10th prince did not explode, but the rage on his face was clear. For a brief moment, the beast-like pupils tightened as if they wanted to swallow the distance between them. When he spoke again, his tone was calm, but every word rang a little too sharp. "A viscount at your age," he said slowly. "It seems you are not entirely without merit. To reach such a position so young, you must have talent and a strong background." The prince's gaze did not leave Michael. "In that case," he continued, "I am curious." He tilted his head slightly. "Viscount Mike, nor tell me the name of your father." Michael was not trained in politics, but he was not foolish. He understood the weight inside that question. This was not simple curiosity. The 10th prince wanted a name he could measure. If there was nothing there, the silence would speak louder than any insult. Michael looked at him for a moment. Then he answered in a quiet, even voice. "Unless your highness goes to the heavens to ask him yourself," he said. "Even I do not know my father's name." Michael's words fell into the hall like a stone dropped into still water. He had not meant to be rude. He had simply replied in the same tone the 10th prince had used. If the prince's question carried sharpness, Michael's answer reflected. That was all. The 10th prince's eyes narrowed, the golden pupils thinning again. He was about to speak when the 9th prince's voice suddenly cut through the hall. "How dare you!" A ripple of shock surged through the nobles. Raylion, the 9th prince, stepped forward, pointing at Michael with open fury. "How dare you ignore the dignity of a prince?" he shouted. "How dare you speak in that manner before royalty?" The 7th prince's lips pulled into a thin smile, but Raylion was not finished. He swung his arm sharply and pointed toward the 2nd prince on the platform. "And you," he barked, "is this the person your judgment sees promise in?" The hall froze again. The 2nd prince's face twisted. This was the first time his expression cracked openly. A thin line of anger flashed beneath his eyes. Raelian's accusation was not small. It was a direct challenge to his judgment, his authority, and his position in the royal succession. Every noble watched with bated breath. The seventh prince's smile widened. Michael watched quietly as he grew even more disgusted. The second prince opened his mouth to reply, but the 10th prince spoke first. He stepped forward half a pace and let his words strike the hall. The 9th prince is right. Silence crashed down. Even Raelian blinked before his expression turned smug. The 10th prince folded his hands behind his back, eyes half-lidded, but sharp. If nothing is done now, he said, I will become a joke in the kingdom. A few nobles inhaled sharply. Some looked at Michael with pity. Others with barely restrained satisfaction. Many more with cold agreement. The 10th prince continued, his tone light but every word heavy. A viscount who cannot follow protocol. A viscount who dares answer. Royalty as an equal. He let the silence hang. That reflects poorly on the one who supported him. Every gaze shifted toward the second prince. Michael exhaled softly. He had seen enough. Their politics, their petty traps, their inflated pride, their obsession with face and hierarchy. He had no interest in staying another second. Michael turned away from the center of the hall. He took one step toward the doors. Another. The nobles stiffened as they realized he was leaving in the middle of a royal confrontation and without permission. Michael did not care. Before he reached the third step, a voice echoed through the hall. Sir Mike, Princess Priscilla said, can you give me face and wait a moment? The hall froze again. Dozens of eyes widened. Even the prince's expressions shifted. Michael stopped walking. He turned only enough to face Princess Priscilla. His voice was calm, polite, but unrestrained. I apologize, Your Highness, he said. But for tonight, I cannot remain in the same air as any of the princes. Aside from the second prince. A pin could have dropped and the entire hall would have heard it. Shock spread across noble faces like wildfire. Chapter 692 You. How dare you? Several voices rang out at once as a group of men in black burst out from the shadows. Despite their restrained presence, each one radiated the unmistakable intensity of a rank 2 creature. These were the shadow guards of the royal family. The sudden appearance of the men in black sent another ripple of tension through the hall. Everyone knew who they were. The shadow guards. According to rumors, they were children taken young and trained in isolation, raised without a family name, without affection, without identity beyond service. Their bodies were tempered through brutal methods. Their emotions were carved away, and their loyalty was shaped into something absolute. They were not naturally strong. Their strength came from forbidden methods that forcibly boosted their power at the cost of their lifespan. The kingdom called it a noble sacrifice. The shadow guards called it their purpose. Every royal member received a number of them of varying strength based on status. The king held the strongest group. The great princess held a unit second only to his. The crown prince had a single squad. The various princes held smaller numbers depending on rank and favor. Even the 7th and 9th princes had their personal guards hidden in the shadows. Tonight, all of them seemed to respond at once to Michael's words. The dozen men in black stood between him and the platform in a protective, predatory formation. Their hands rested lightly on their weapons. Their aura flared just enough to show intent. Arian's face went pale. Syria's legs trembled. Dozens of nobles looked away, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Michael's eyes swept over the shadow guards. The nearest guard stepped forward, voice cold. You dare insult the royal bloodline in the presence of their highnesses. Stand down and await judgment. Michael's brows lowered a fraction. A hall full of nobles and princes staring at him like he was an animal. A prince demanding the name of a father he never knew. He had really reached the limit of what he could tolerate from this place. Princess Priscilla raised her hand slowly. Enough, she said. The shadows froze. The great princess did not raise her voice, but her authority pressed over the hall like a steady tide. She turned her gaze toward Michael. Sir Mike, she said. I asked you to wait. Her eyes flicked to the shadow guards, then back to him. You will not be harmed tonight. Michael held her gaze for a few seconds before speaking. I appreciate your concern, Your Highness, he said, voice calm and steady. But honestly, there is no one here who could hurt me. The hall froze again. Not a breath moved. This time, even the second prince's expression shifted. His usually gentle gaze cooled. Inside, he began to feel cold toward Michael at the sheer audacity of those words spoken in front of nearly the entire royal bloodline. A few nobles nearly choked. Some stared in horror. Others in disbelief. Arrogant. Too arrogant. Unrealistically arrogant. Even if it were true, one did not say such things in the royal palace. And beneath it all, a quieter thought echoed through the hall. He even said it after the great princess personally intervened. Did he not consider her face at all? The shadow guards heard the words as well. Rage flickered across several of their gazes. Their masks hid their expressions, but their killing intent rose like a blade being unsheathed. One guard shifted his leg forward. Another tightened his grip on his weapon. A third lowered his center of gravity. All of them moved at once. Or rather, they tried to. None of them managed to take even a single step. A suffocating pressure pressed down on their limbs. Their muscles locked. Their feet refused to lift from the floor. It was as if invisible chains bound them in place. A few nobles gasped. Most did not even understand what had happened. But the princes did. The second prince's eyes widened a fraction. The seventh and ninth princes lost their earlier amusement. The 10th prince's pupils tightened like a beast scenting danger. And Michael simply looked at the frozen shadow guards with a mild expression, as if wondering why they had even tried. Of course, Michael was the reason the shadow guards could not take a step. While he had spent the last months searching for the perfect law to cultivate, he had not neglected the rest of his growth. He had trained his magic, studied spells, practiced forms, improved his knowledge. And, most importantly, he had harvested skills from his undead. Whenever something caught his interest, one of those skills came from Lucky. Lucky's thin but undeniable dragon bloodline carried a primal, instinctive skill, a form of intimidation that dragons used against lesser creatures. Michael had copied it. What the shadow guards felt was not killing intent. It was not mana pressure. It was a command buried deep inside their survival instincts. Do not move. A command their bodies obeyed before their minds could resist. Even Princess Priscilla's eyes sharpened slightly. The royal hall remained frozen, every noble trapped between fear and disbelief. The princes were no different. The 9th prince, who had been the loudest only moments ago, now looked as if his throat had turned dry. The 7th prince's amusement disappeared completely. The 10th prince's beast-like pupils narrowed to thin slits. All carelessness gone. And the 2nd prince stared at Michael in quiet shock. Michael stood there casually, almost bored, while a dozen grand stage shadow guards were reduced to motionless statues. Only Princess Priscilla kept her composure, although even she now watched Michael with a new, calculating light. Michael turned again and began walking toward the doors. The shadow guards remained frozen behind him. Everyone else stared, too shocked to breathe, when the great princess's voice echoed once more. Sir Mike. Her tone was composed but sharper than before. I can understand your frustration, but it is not untrue that you insulted the royal family tonight. It was unprovoked. The hall stirred. A few nobles nodded slightly. Others wondered if she was simply trying to save face for her nephews. Michael paused. He did not keep walking. Instead, he turned fully toward her, no longer hiding the cold edge in his eyes. Unprovoked? He asked quietly. Princess Priscilla met his gaze without flinching. Yes, you spoke too sharply. Even if you felt wronged, your words were dash. Does that mean you agree with everything he said? He did not wait for her to finish. He did not bother saying, the 10th prince. He simply raised his hand and pointed at the man in question. At the prince who started the insult. At the beast-eyed royal who had prodded him first. at the man who believed Michael's worth could be measured by the father he never knew. "Do you agree with everything he said?" Michael asked. His voice was calm, clear, and mercilessly direct. The hall trembled. Nobles inhaled sharply. Several nearly fainted. The 10th prince's expression darkened, something feral flashing in his gaze. Even the 2nd prince frowned. Princess Priscilla did not answer right away. She looked once toward the 10th prince, then back to Michael. "No," she said at last. "I do not agree with everything he said." His words could have been chosen better. The 10th prince's jaw tightened. Several nobles lowered their heads, afraid to be caught watching him. The coldness in Michael's eyes faded slightly. He released a quiet breath and gave a small shake of his head. That answer told him enough. The princess did not share the 10th prince's view, but she also did not see this matter the same way Michael did. To her, it was a problem of etiquette, of how things should be said in public. To him, it was far more than that. He did not blame her. Background shaped people. She had been born at the peak of the kingdom, raised above the clouds of ordinary life. Even if she was better than most, even if she saw further than her nephews, she still stood on a different ground than the people below. One could not expect someone raised at the top to think the same way as those raised at the bottom. Michael did not consider himself a saint. He had made judgments of his own in the past. He had looked down on people at times. He had drawn lines in his mind more than once. But deep inside, he still saw himself as a basic human above anything else. Maybe that was why this bothered him more than it should have. Or maybe it was because the one insulted was not him. It was Yuga, a boy who had stood before him with nothing but raw strength and honest will. Michael's gaze softened slightly from her earlier answer. But he was done with this hall. He turned back toward the doors and began walking again. "Sir Mike." Princess Priscilla's voice sounded once more. This time, a faint frown shaped her tone. "Do you intend to walk out on me?" Michael stopped, but he did not fully turn. "No," he said quietly. "I just do not feel great right now." And he continued walking. The 2nd prince's brows creased further. The 7th prince's lips curved in cold amusement. The 10th prince's eyes glowed with molten anger. And the 9th prince's face twisted in disbelief. Princess Priscilla moved. One moment she stood on the platform. The next, she appeared beside Michael in a smooth blur of motion. A few nobles gasped softly. She reached toward him, perhaps to stop him. But she did not touch him. Because at that moment, midair, her hand was already being caught by an unfamiliar figure. Chapter 693 Guardians 1. The more Michael's undead advanced to rank 3, the more he found himself relying on them. In sparring, in studying, and even in the moments when he sat alone to cultivate his law, their presence shaped his growth. He had not noticed it at first. But as the weeks passed, a clear pattern appeared. He was not only using them more, he was beginning to understand them, their instincts, their quirks, their personalities. Every undead that reached rank 3 developed a more defined sense of self. Lucky became greedier with tasting grass. Prince grew increasingly obsessed with studying souls, acting as if he intended to surpass Michael as a necromancer. Ghost became quieter but was a fitness lover as beginning, and the two were often together. Lily was just a glutton. And Fade had changed in his own way. He had originally been a mantis, a pure assassin with no thoughts beyond killing and obeying. After reaching rank 3 and forming a humanoid body, something inside him shifted. He became fixated on one role, being Michael's bodyguard. He watched Michael constantly. He lingered in whatever shadow Michael happened to stand in. He even corrected his posture based on the strange novel Spartan kept forcing on him. Michael had once walked in on Fade trying to fold clothes because Spartan's book, Royal Soldier in Love, said bodyguards should have elegant manners. Michael blamed this on two things. First was Spartan, who was obsessed with being a scholar and shared every ridiculous book he could find. Second was the natural instinct of undead to serve their master. Fade simply mixed both influences in the strangest way possible. And now, in the royal hall, The same Fade who had been hiding in Michael's shadow was the one holding Princess Priscilla's wrist in midair. The entire hall froze again. It was more accurate to say that the hall had been frozen for a while. Now, this time the shock came from confusion. No one had seen him move, not even the shadow guards, famed for their flawless perception. One moment Princess Priscilla reached out. The next, her hand was caught gently but firmly by a tall, lean figure in black armor with pale green eyes. Fade. His voice was soft and calm. "Do not touch my lord." The shadow guards' eyes widened behind their masks. The nobles stepped back. Several princes tensed on instinct. Princess Priscilla slowly turned her gaze toward the figure holding her wrist. Her expression did not change. Michael blinked once. He did not even have time to think before Fade bowed his head, slightly still holding her wrist. "My lord does not wish to be touched," Fade said in the same calm tone. "Please respect his boundary." Michael dragged a hand across his face. Of all the undead who could have appeared at that exact moment, it had to be Fade. He was the only one outside with Michael tonight. Princess Priscilla looked calm, but her mind churned. Those who knew a little about Michael suspected he came from a mysterious background. His strength alone made him unusual. Someone that powerful appearing from nowhere was possible but rare. And Michael never carried himself lower than anyone, which made people assume his backing was extraordinary. So when she saw an unfamiliar man holding her hand, appearing without warning, a thought came to her naturally. Was this his guardian? Was he from this world, or from Michael's unknown original world? She tried to pull her hand back. She met resistance. Dislodging herself would require real effort, something she had not experienced in years. And how had this man stood before her without being noticed? But she was not frightened. Fade held her wrist with steady, controlled strength. The nobles, who had been trembling earlier, finally broke. Whispers spread across the hall. Where did he come from? Was he there before? Who is he? Another great one? Princess Priscilla looked up. You are his guard? Fade answered without a pause. I am the shadow of my lord. His tone was soft but firm. I will not allow anyone to place their hands on him without his permission. She tested her wrist again. The grip did not hurt, but it would not budge. Release me, she said. Fade did not answer. His pale green eyes shifted past her shoulder, focused on a point. Behind her, his voice dropped even lower. If you move any closer to my lord again, I will take action. The marble floor might as well have been ice. The entire hall felt it. Princess Priscilla's eyes tightened slightly. It was one of the few visible changes in her expression since the confrontation began. Everyone else was confused. The princes, the nobles, even the shadow guards. None of them understood who this figure was or why he dared speak to the great princess like that. But Michael understood. He was staring at a particular spot in the hall. His gaze held there for 3 silent seconds. He sensed it before it occurred. A faint disturbance in the air, a shift in pressure. And then the change arrived. An old man in black robes stepped out from nothingness, as though he had always been standing there. The shadow guards, freed earlier by Michael, dropped to one knee in unison. Their voices rang out together. Grand Shadow. A hush swept across the palace. Princess Priscilla tilted her head slightly in acknowledgement. The old man did not look at her. He did not look at Michael. He did not look at the princes. His gaze locked on Fade. Fade did not look away. The two stood in absolute silence. The nobles did not know who the unfamiliar figure in armor was, but they all knew the black-robed elder who had just appeared when they heard his title. The Grand Shadow, the one who commanded all shadow guards under the royal family. He also had another title, the second brother of the second-generation king of the kingdom. Chapter 694 Guardians 2. The two stood in absolute silence. The nobles did not know who the unfamiliar figure in armor was, but they all recognized the black-robed elder the moment they heard his title. The Grand Shadow. He was the one who commanded all shadow guards under the royal family. He also held another title. He was the second brother of the second-generation king of the kingdom. Even to Princess Priscilla, who was above 60 years old, this man was like her great-grandfather and the guardian of the royal palace. He had appeared only because he sensed traces of shadow magic, something an assassin of his level was extremely sensitive to. The old man's presence was quiet, yet it pressed on the hall like an invisible weight. His eyes were a dull, faded gray, but they were fixed on Fade. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a voice sounded in Michael's mind. "My lord, I cannot beat him." Fade did not move his lips, but Michael heard him clearly. Michael did not need the warning. His eye of truth had activated the moment the old man appeared. This was not the first rank 3 he had seen. It was, however, the most terrifying. But was Michael afraid? No. His heart did not speed up. His breathing did not change. He simply tightened his control over his emotions and watched. The old man's gaze shifted slightly. A faint hint of killing intent spread into the air, too thin for most people to notice. But Michael's undead noticed it immediately. From the shadow beneath Michael's feet, something else stirred. A second darkness separated itself and rose. There was only one undead in his army with a nature similar to Fade's. Ghost. The figure that rose beside Michael was much larger than Fade. A tall, broad-shouldered man with short dark hair and deep green eyes that absorbed every detail around him. His presence was heavy. Ghost had always been strange, even among Michael's undead. From rank 0 onward, he had always been the strongest of his tier. Rank 1, the same. Rank 2, again the same. Now at rank 3, the difference had become almost absurd. If they compared raw power alone, only beginning could challenge him, and even then only when beginning pushed his rebirth law to its absolute limit. Under normal conditions, Ghost was Michael's strongest undead. A true monster. The old man felt it as well. His killing intent, which had chilled the air moments earlier, softened and flickered with caution. He studied Ghost, then Fade, then Michael. For the first time, a hint of uncertainty crossed his ancient eyes. When he arrived, the situation looked clear. Multiple shadow-type beings surrounding a noble youth. Shadow guards suppressed. Foreign entities that showed no fear toward the royal family. There was only one logical assumption. They were enemies. But now his instincts wavered. These figures were far too strong to be ordinary spies or assassins. The old man's killing intent faded further. Suspicion, calculation, and wariness took its place. He finally spoke. "What?" he said slowly. "Are all of you doing in my kingdom?" The royal banquet ended in a way no one had expected. The original purpose was technically fulfilled. The one who gained the most was the second prince. Of the extra 10 slots, 7 went to his faction. The 10th prince was not as lucky. His careless remarks earned him a punishment and he nearly lost his slot. The 9th and 7th princes suffered the most. Their loud behavior, their mockery, and their eagerness to stir conflict made them look immature and unstable. Older factions quietly withdrew support. In the race for the throne, both princes dropped an entire tier in influence within a week. And then there was Michael. People no longer saw him as a mysterious youth. They now saw him as a young man backed by a power capable of producing 2 great stage supernatural guardians. A lineage-level force, the kind only ancient families possessed. Maybe he came from the Empire to train. Perhaps a hidden clan from across the sea. Maybe a branch family with terrifying standards. Or an envoy sent to observe our kingdom. Michael, however, was thinking of none of them. As the Evermoon carriage carried him away from the banquet, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. For a moment, he wondered if he had gone too far by acting like himself tonight. But the feeling disappeared quickly. The truth was simple. He felt great. For the first time in a long while, he had spoken exactly as he wanted. He had acted as he wished. He had lowered his head to no one. What was the point of gaining power if you lived your life bowing to others? If you spent every moment trying not to offend someone? Power was meant to be used. Power was meant to give freedom. Michael had lived freely tonight, and it felt incredible. There was only one small problem. He turned to the side inside the carriage. Ariane sat opposite him. Her hands were neatly placed on her lap. Her back was straight. Her eyes were lowered. Her posture was unnaturally formal, rigid even. Michael frowned slightly. "Princess?" he called softly. Ariane lifted her gaze. She blinked once, as though pulled from deep thought. "Yes, Sir Mike," she answered. "Are you all right?" Michael asked. Ariane hesitated. A faint breath left her lips. Then she spoke quietly. "Can someone of your status still call me princess?" Michael blinked. "My status?" he asked. "What status?" Ariane stared at him like he had asked whether fire was hot. Before she could reply, he continued. "I am just a viscount." Ariane stared for a moment. Then her lips curved. Her entire posture relaxed, melting like frost under the morning sun. Her smile brightened, warm and relieved. "I see," she said softly. "You should stop calling me princess." Michael raised a brow. "Oh? And what should I call you then?" Ariane's smile grew wider, sweet and openly pleased. "Call me Ariane," she said. Chapter 695, Second Floor of Hell. Michael sat on a tall hill, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared across the endless frozen plains. The land was quiet and empty, cold enough to numb a normal person, yet strangely peaceful. Michael exhaled slowly. "It looks beautiful," he said under his breath. A soft crunch of snow sounded beside him. Spartan stood there in a perfectly tailored suit, his long hair tied into a high ponytail, black-rimmed glasses resting neatly on his nose. He adjusted them with practiced elegance. "What looks beautiful, master?" Spartan asked gently. Michael did not answer right away. His eyes remained on the horizon. "It reminds me," he finally said, "that even in a place that feels lonely, the peace it provides might be more valuable than one can imagine." Spartan blinked and looked out at the same landscape, confusion flickering in his eyes. He clearly did not see what Michael saw, but he did not question it. He simply adjusted his glasses again and nodded. "A deep thought from Master. Very poetic." Michael chuckled quietly. He was not trying to be poetic. He simply liked the sight. The world was frozen and harsh, but in that moment it was peaceful, and he liked that. After a few more seconds of silence, Michael rose to his feet. Snow slid off his cloak. "That is enough rest. It is time to enter the second floor." Spartan straightened immediately. "Understood, Master." Michael looked across the wide expanse. This floor was enormous. Even after hours of hunting, he had barely covered the terrain. The monsters here were sparse, but each encounter added something new to his legion. Along the way he had also encountered several races. Some he recognized, others he did not, but not a single elf among them. No trace of them anywhere. He had hoped to see at least one elven settlement, but there was nothing. Maybe they simply did not have a station on this level. Or maybe they did, but it was too far for him to reach during his sweep. What he did find were 2 additional Federation stations. It made sense. Aurora could not rely on only one entrance into Hell. What Michael did not know was how many gates truly existed across the realm. Truly an interesting place. He checked his panel and nodded. 400. His undead count had nearly reached that number. There were 2 things worth noting about this. First, it was nowhere near his limit. His contract slots could handle much more. Second, he had not been hunting randomly. He only recruited 2 monsters per species, a male and a female, then immediately left to locate a new race. He had no desire to fill his legion with identical creatures for now. What he wanted was variety, a balanced and flexible army. His lineup was already impressive. As for why 400 was far below his true limit, the answer was simple. It was not even close. He needed 2 things to advance to rank 3. The first was a law. The second was 5 rank 3 undead. That requirement had once barely been a wall for him since 500 had been the limit of his contract slots. He assumed that to break the mission again he would need to raise all 500 to rank 3. That was the plan. Then his second evolution happened. Becoming a true human changed everything. His foundation strengthened, his soul deepened, and the limit inside him expanded. His contract slots rose from 500 to 1500. Triple his old capacity. Now the old requirement felt trivial. What benefits leveling up at rank 3 would bring thanks to this evolution was something he would only know once he advanced. Spartan finished adjusting his gloves and looked out at the plains. "I wonder where the entrance to the second floor of Hell is located," he said. Michael reached into his storage space and pulled out the crystal. "Map. That is easy to check." A pulse of mana lit the surface as a wide projection appeared. Michael shifted the map until a faint marker blinked. There. The entrance. It was farther than expected. Michael memorized the position and stored the map. Asterisk. The journey toward the entrance was long, but for the first time since entering Hell, Michael saw a large gathering. Aside from the Federation settlements scattered across the plains, this was the only place where travelers seemed to gather naturally. The closer he drew to the entrance, the more figures he spotted. Moving across the frozen field, Michael also spotted a few from his own race. They passed by him with quick glances. Those who nodded at him received a simple nod in return. Michael could already see it ahead. A massive crack on a boulder in the frozen earth, like a wound carved into the land, glowing faintly with dim blue light. The entrance. Michael did not slow down. The moment he reached the glowing boulder, he placed a hand on its surface and stepped forward. In the blink of an eye, his body was pulled in. A twisting force wrapped around him like a spiral tunnel, dragging his consciousness through a passage. His vision blurred, colors stretched, sound vanished, and for half a second he lost all sense of direction. Then a dull boom followed. Michael landed on solid ground. His knees bent instinctively to cushion the impact. He steadied himself, shook his head once, and exhaled. Michael opened his eyes, and the world had changed. The icy plains, the pale blue glow, the serene cold silence, all of it was gone. In its place was heat, oppressive heat. The ground beneath him was red, like rust, like dried blood, like scorched clay that had never known water. The sky above him was also red, a deep, ominous crimson. /N. It is a day before the end of the month, guys. Thank you all for your support and happy Thanksgiving. Sorry it is coming late. I am also sorry for the disorganized uploads. I promise it will get better after exams, haha. In any case, happy new month in advance. You guys are the best. All of you. Chapter 696 Starborn. Michael stood still for a moment, observing before reaching out into his soul space to summon Spartan out of the damaged coffin of the forgotten inner space. Spartan appeared at his side, suit pristine, glasses untouched, ponytail still neat as if he had not been dismissed at all. He adjusted his frames once and bowed his head. "We have arrived, Master." Michael gave a small nod. Spartan straightened and looked around at the red sand and red sky. "This place has a very unfriendly atmosphere," he said quietly. Michael exhaled, feeling the heat press against his skin. "Let us go. We still have many floors to reach, so we should not waste time here." Michael turned his gaze to the empty desert ahead and took his first step on the second floor of Hell. What Michael had not expected was to step on something strange. A faint crunch came from beneath his boot. He frowned and looked down. At first, it looked like a rock half buried in red sand. But when he crouched and brushed the grains aside, his expression shifted. Beneath the sand lay a body, humanoid in shape, blue-skinned, faintly luminous, as if a veil of stars shimmered just beneath its flesh. Even now, when most of its light had dimmed, tiny specks of starlight still pulsed weakly across its surface. Michael placed a hand near the figure's chest. A slow, fragile rhythm answered, barely alive. No wonder he had not sensed anything earlier. There was almost no life left to sense. He studied the being more closely. It looked human except for the blue skin and the tiny shining spots. "This is," Michael muttered softly, surprise flickering across his features. "A Starborn." He glanced at Spartan. Master, is that not one of the star race? Michael nodded slowly. It is. A human variant race, one of the 5 most technologically advanced civilizations in the universe. In many areas, they even surpass Aurora. Michael's gaze lingered on the Starborn's dimly glowing skin. It is said, he began quietly, that the first Starborns were born when a wandering cluster of stellar energy collided with a human settlement thousands of years ago. Spartan tilted his head slightly, listening. The humans survived, Michael continued, but they changed. Their bodies adapted to the starlight that flooded their land. Their children were born glowing, their organs absorbing and storing light the way plants store nutrients. That was the beginning of the star race. He brushed more sand away from the figure's arm, revealing faint shimmering patterns like constellations etched under its skin. Their uniqueness is not just their glow, Michael said softly. Starborns have a natural affinity for light, and all its higher derivatives depending on their strength and talent. Photon manipulation, hard light constructs, stellar energy absorption. Things that other races have to spend lifetimes studying come to them almost naturally. Then there is their intelligence. Spartan lowered his gaze. And their intelligence? One of their greatest strengths, Michael replied. A Starborn's brain fully matures by the age of 8. By then most of them think, analyze, and understand the world better than a 20-year-old human. Their innovations shaped half the advanced technologies the universe depends on, making them a top 10 race. They are not weaker than the Elven civilization and might even surpass it in some aspects. Spartan looked impressed. Truly remarkable. It would be perfect, Michael said, if not for their curse. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly as he examined the barely breathing Starborn. They are short-lived, very short-lived. Starborns, without becoming supernaturals, can only live up to 40 years. Their bodies burn through life as quickly as they absorb light, which makes their population extremely low. Spartan nodded slowly. It is almost like every top race that has powerful racial abilities suffers from low population. The universe is fair in its own way. Michael sighed. Yes, their civilization is one of the oldest and strongest in the universe, but their numbers have always been small. Too small. And their physical strength is weak. Extremely weak. Their bodies are delicate. Their bones soft. Even among humans, they are one of the most fragile. His fingers brushed the Starborn's wrist gently. The faint glow flickered feebly in response. Low population and weak physique, Michael murmured. Those are their only true weaknesses, but they are also fatal ones. He looked at the barely breathing figure again. For a race this rare and advanced to have one of their own lying here, alone in the sands of hell, something must have gone very wrong. Spartan asked, "Should we help them, Master?" Michael already knew the answer. Of course. He rested a hand lightly on the being's chest. The glow beneath the Starborn's skin flickered again, this time brighter, as if responding instinctively to Michael's touch. "Let us stabilize them first," he said. "Then we find out why a member of the star race ended up on the second floor of hell." Spartan watched the dim glow pulse weakly under the Starborn's skin. After a moment he spoke. "Master, is it not better to turn them into an undead? Their body is already close to death. It would be easier." Michael did not even look up. "Easier, yes, but also the fastest way to make the star race wipe me off the face of the universe." Spartan blinked behind his glasses. Michael continued, voice calm and direct. "The last group that tried to turn a Starborn into an undead lost everything. Their entire faction vanished. Not defeated, erased. Their planet was turned into cosmic dust." Spartan's expression stiffened immediately. Michael paused, then added through their mental link. "Even if we ever wanted to do that, it would only be to someone whose background we fully understand. Or an enemy. Never a random Starborn found half dead on the ground." Spartan nodded slowly. Michael continued mentally. "The star race is also one of Aurora's important allies. Turning one of Them into an undead would be the same as declaring war. He looked down at the fragile, glowing being beneath him. We helped this one recover. Nothing more. Spartan bowed his head. Understood, Master. Chapter 697 Troublesome Demon? Michael summoned another creature from the damaged coffin of the Forgotten. This undead was a bit special. It was the very one Michael had used to exchange for his dead undead back at the Unified College exams. But here was the thing. Why had there been only one undead exchanged when he had lost more than one? It was because this undead, though lower in raw power, was far more precious than any of Michael's own. He could not deny it. How could he? This was an extraordinary rank creature whose function was to serve as an extra life for its host. When alive, it had been a parasite-type creature. One could even consider it living armor. It fed on its host's life force to survive, and when the host was injured, it returned all that stored energy to heal them. It was reusable so long as it never gave away every last drop of life energy and always kept enough to slowly recharge. Michael had taken the worm's corpse and revived it. Yes, even after death the worm remained useful. It had simply dropped one grade and could now only bond with creatures of that lower rank. It practically screamed treasure for necromancers. Yet because it was rare rank, only rank 2 necromancers could truly appreciate it, and even among them few could afford one. Michael just happened to be one of the rare few. Unknown to others, he was the only one who could eventually return the worm to its previous rank and perhaps take it even higher in the future. So why was Michael bringing the worm out now? Was it because it had healing abilities? Yes, it did. After Michael reached rank 3 and regained the luck tied to the law of life, the worm recovered the ability to heal others even without spending its own stored energy. It could now do so purely through the law abilities Michael granted it. Michael placed the tiny body of the worm on the Starborn's head. Soon the worm's body began to glow. 30 seconds later, Michael returned the worm, currently nicknamed the Louse Worm, to his coffin space and waited for the now fully healed Starborn to regain consciousness. He did not have to wait long. A faint shiver ran through the Starborn's body. The tiny points of starlight under its skin flickered, then brightened. Its eyelids trembled once, twice, and slowly opened. 2 pupils like molten silver stared up at the sky, unfocused at first, then sharpening with sudden awareness. The moment the Starborn saw Michael and Spartan standing over it, its eyes widened in alarm. Before Michael could say a single word, the Starborn reacted. A burst of radiant light pulsed through its body. Metallic particles surged from beneath its skin, coating its entire frame in shining, star-forged armor within a heartbeat. The transformation was smooth, flawless, and instantaneous. A circular burst of energy erupted at its feet. Sand blasted outward as the Starborn shot backward in a sudden retreat. The Starborn tried to flee. Well, it tried. As the armored figure launched away, Michael's hand shot forward with casual precision. His fingers closed around the Starborn's ankle. The creature froze mid-movement, suspended in the air like a caught insect. Michael's voice was calm. "Where do you think you're going without saying thank you?" The Starborn flailed once, its armor shimmering as defensive mechanisms activated. Thin lines of light crawled across its body, forming protective seals and shifting layers. Even Michael's expression changed slightly at the sight. This was not ordinary armor. It was advanced, elegant, and adaptable. It reminded Michael of Rin's armor, except this one was even more refined and sleeker. The Starborn twisted in his grip, its voice muffled beneath the metallic mask. "Let go! Let go! Let go!" Michael raised a brow. He held the ankle effortlessly, as if the struggling being weighed no more than a small bird. The power generated by the armor was actually not weak. Not quite rank 3 yet, but very close. Spartan stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. "It appears they are frightened, Master." "I noticed," Michael said dryly. The Starborn tried again to yank its leg free, each pull accompanied by a small explosion. The armor changed shape subtly with every attempt, reinforcing the joints, shifting the plating, preparing for the next maneuver. It was fascinating to watch. Michael looked at the metal sheen thoughtfully. I have to admit, he said, this is interesting. Very interesting. The Starborn froze, finally realizing that no amount of struggling would work. Slowly, the armored head turned. Those molten silver eyes met Michael's calm gaze. For the first time, the Starborn spoke clearly. W? Who are you? Michael smiled faintly. The person who saved your life. The armor dimmed slightly, as if reacting to the Starborn's confusion. The being hesitated, then asked in a quieter voice, I am not dead? No, Michael replied. You were close, but not anymore. Silence settled for a moment. The Starborn trembled faintly, the armor shifting back into a more stable form. Its voice was softer now, almost breathless. Then, why? Did you help me? Michael's fingers loosened around the ankle, though he didn't release. Yet, because leaving someone to die when I can save them is not something I do, he answered simply. The Starborn blinked. Spartan cleared his throat. You should be grateful. Michael ignored him. Instead, he looked at the Starborn's armor again, eyes narrowing with interest. But if you want to run off into the desert, at least say something before you disappear. The Starborn lowered its gaze. Thank you. Michael nodded once. Good. Now let us talk. He released the ankle. The being dropped lightly onto the red sand, armor glinting under the crimson sky. The Starborn straightened slowly, still wary but no longer trying to flee. Michael folded his arms. Now then, why is a Starborn lying? Half dead on the second floor of hell. The Starborn swallowed. And the answer that came next made Michael's eyes narrow. Because I was fleeing from something. The air shifted. Something, Michael repeated quietly. Or someone. The Starborn hesitated, then whispered, both. It was a demon. The heat of the red desert suddenly felt heavier. And Michael realized this encounter was no coincidence at all. Well, it actually was a coincidence. For now, Michael watched the Starborn in silence for a moment, then spoke. Good. You can stand and talk, so start explaining. The silver eyes flickered. Under the armor, the Starborn's throat moved in a dry swallow. Explain. Yes. Michael tilted his head slightly. Why are you here? Why were you almost dead? And why did you try to run the moment you woke up? The Starborn looked from Michael to Spartan, then back again. The armor shifted faintly, plates relaxing just a little. I was not supposed to be here, the Starborn said softly. My strength is enough to train on the 20th floor. I only came down here because I was forced to. The 20th floor, Michael repeated. You were training there? The Starborn nodded once. In my race, we come here in teams, it said. The 20th floor is within our safe range. Normally, Michael narrowed his eyes. Normally, he repeated. So what changed? The Starborn's fingers curled at its side. Light shifted nervously along. The armor. A demon appeared, it said. Not one of the natives. Suddenly, appeared, ignored our barriers as if they were paper, and started killing everything in sight. Michael's gaze sharpened slightly. How strong? The Starborn hesitated, then looked at him more closely. Before that, it said, I need to know something. Are you a local cultivator or an awakener? Michael blinked once. A local cultivator, the Starborn explained quickly, is someone who uses the native supernatural system of this realm. Techniques, realms, paths that belong only to your world. An awakener uses the more universal system, rank-based with a standard structure. I need to know which one you follow to explain properly. Michael answered without hiding anything. I am an awakener. The Starborn fell quiet for a breath, as if recalibrating how to speak. In that case, it said slowly, the demon's strength was at rank 3, but it felt like it was already touching the realm above. Like it was only half a step away from rank 4. Michael's eyes narrowed. Half a step, he said. The Starborn nodded again, this time with more conviction. Our captain was a solid rank 3 mid-stage with a specialization in suppression fields. Even with every protocol activated, it did not matter. The demon broke through our defenses, destroyed our shields, and almost wiped the team in less than a minute. *n. Happy last day of the month, everyone, as we close out the final month of the year. Thank you all for sticking with me this far. I hope the new month treats us well and that will ring in the new year. Together, as a little thank you, I'd like to make a short comic episode for the novel. Please let me know which fight you'd rather see. Michael versus Rin, Michael versus Brian. Thank you so much for reading. Chapter 698, The Situation 1. Silence settled heavily between them. The Starborn's words lingered in the hot air. A demon at rank 3 was normal. A demon touching the next realm was not in these lower floors. Even the current Michael knew his limits. Of course, the fact he was still calm showed his confidence. Michael opened his mouth to ask another question, but before a single word left him, the world twitched. A sharp vibration rippled through the air. The Starborn's armor tightened instantly. Spartan adjusted his glasses and shifted his weight. Michael's eyes narrowed. A tear in space appeared just a short distance away. No one needed to speak. All three understood immediately. Someone was entering the second floor. The only real question was simple. From where? The first floor? Or the third? The Starborn stepped back instinctively. Spartan took one step forward, half guarding Michael's side. Michael himself simply watched with calm eyes as the tier widened. Then a body shot out of the tier and crashed onto the red sand. Sand exploded around the figure. A plume of dust rose high into the air. The impact left a shallow crater. Michael's brows lifted slightly. The fallen figure pushed against the ground weakly, barely able to lift their head. Their body was covered in scorched armor, parts of it melted or broken. Their arm shook violently. Their breathing was ragged. Their aura flickered like a dying ember. Michael felt it the moment the aura brushed against him. Rank 3, but barely holding on. The Starborn spoke first, voice trembling slightly. They are injured. Badly. Anyone who looks like that after crossing floors should not be coming from the first floor. Michael stepped closer, eyes steady. Which means, he said quietly, they came from above. A cold breeze swept across the desert. The injured figure coughed, spitting red into the sand before forcing out a single weak sentence. Demonic supernaturals. Their voice cracked. Those bastards. Michael froze. Demonic supernaturals? That was a familiar term. He turned to look at the figure closely. It was a man, dark-skinned and human. But why did the situation turn from a super-strong demon to demonic supernaturals? The injured man tried to move but collapsed again, his body trembling. Michael sighed faintly, then summoned the life worm once more. The tiny, pale creature materialized in his hand, wriggling lazily. Despite its harmless appearance, its presence alone carried the weight of a rank 3 existence. Michael crouched beside the soldier and placed the worm gently on his forehead. Almost immediately, the worm began to glow, a faint, soothing light that pulsed in rhythm with the man's heartbeat. The smell of burning flesh faded. Scorched skin began knitting together and the man's breathing steadied. 30 seconds later, the light dimmed. Michael retrieved the worm and returned it to the damaged coffin of the forgotten. He stood, watching as the soldier's eyelids fluttered open. Confusion filled the man's eyes as he slowly looked up. His gaze swept over Michael's calm face, Spartan's composed figure, and the armored Starborn standing a few feet away. He finally spoke, voice raw but audible. "Who are you?" Michael tilted his head slightly. "I should be the one asking that," he replied calmly. "Who are you?" The man blinked several times, then looked at Michael more closely. His eyes lingered on the young man's face. Then his memory shifted to the presence he had felt just earlier. Rank 3. His eyes trembled. And finally, he looked at the Starborn beside them, whose silver eyes and armor revealed his race instantly. "You healed me," he said slowly, still dazed. Yes, Michael answered. Now, who are you? The man took a breath, steadying his mind before replying. I am a soldier of the Aurora realm, he said, his voice gaining a trace of strength. Spartan's brow arched slightly. Michael's eyes sharpened faintly. So a fellow citizen. But why did they end up like this? Then tell me what happened, Michael said. The soldier suddenly clenched his teeth. His jaw tightened. His body trembled once. Then he slammed his fist into the ground. Boom! The impact shook the entire area. Red sand exploded outward. A shockwave rolled across the desert. Even the Starborn flinched backward in surprise as the spot where the soldier struck formed a spiderweb of deep cracks. His face twisted with raw fury. Demonic supernaturals, he hissed. Those fools. Michael waited. The man breathed hard for a few seconds, then slowly forced himself to calm down. His shoulders dropped slightly. His voice steadied. I do not know how it happened, he said at last. He lifted his head, sweat mixing with lingering blood at his temple. One moment everything was normal on the first floor. Our station was fully secure. Then suddenly the attack began. Michael's brows lowered. By the demonic supernaturals? He repeated. By who? The soldier nodded his head. I do not know where they came from. They just appeared. Some were not weaker than me. Some were stronger. The Starborn spoke then. You are rank 3, it whispered. Stronger than most people in the first 30 floors. And there were many who exceeded you. The soldier nodded weakly. Yes, and they attacked without warning. Seeing how coordinated they were, this was surely not a random attack. Michael's fingers tapped lightly against his arm. That is impossible, he said. The soldier froze. Michael continued. If demonic supernaturals wanted to get into hell, they would need to use the gates. And those gates are all fully under Federation control. His words made the soldier's eyes light up in recognition and relief. You came through the Federation gates? The man asked quickly. Yes. For the first time since arriving, the soldier looked more relieved. Then you are Aurora too, he said with certainty. You are one of ours. He inhaled deeply and observed Michael again, this time with far more familiarity than caution. His gaze briefly flicked to Spartan, who stood precisely one step behind Michael's right shoulder, posture perfect and eyes alert.